if you were at my Ash Wednesday homily, you know that I spoke about going back to those three things that Eve was tempted by. That when she looked at the fruit, she saw that it was good for the food, delight for the eyes, and to be desired to make one wise. And the church has seen this over the centuries to be really this overreaching desire for pleasure, good for food, longing to possess, delight to the eyes, and then the pride of life, to be desired to make one wise. This pleasure, longing to possess, and pride. And the church then looking at fasting, almsgiving, and prayer as the antidotes to this. Well, when we look at today's gospel, we see these three temptations, which are kind of the grounding and the root of so many of our temptations. They're there. Those are the temptations for Jesus as well. Turning stones into bread, that going for that physical pleasure to eat. And the kingdoms of the world, everything will be given to you. That delight for the eyes, to be able, the desire to possess. And then throw yourself down from the parapet, this pride that, you will be seen as wonderful, as marvelous, being above everyone else. And Jesus takes these temptations on, head on, and He overcomes them. He overcomes them not to, of course, shame us and say, see, I got through this, you didn't. But rather, to show us, number one, we can get through it. And number two, to walk with us through our temptations. And by fasting, almsgiving, and prayer, we're able to walk through this closer to the heart of God. Let's look at these temptations that... At the heart of all these temptations, Satan says, if you are the Son of God. If you're the Son of God, you can do this. He's questioning His identity. And so because He's saying, question your identity, go after pleasure or desire to possess or pride of life. And Jesus says, no, I know who I am. And who is He? He is the Son of God, which means His Abba is taking care of Him. His Daddy is taking care of Him. And by our baptism, each one of us has been called by name by Almighty God, and we've been made His beloved sons and daughters. You're precious to Him. You're a delight to Almighty God. And God is our Daddy, our Abba, our Father. In fact, Jesus teaches us to call Him Abba, Father. He says it's in our identity that we will be grounded. A lot of times we think that we have to, white knuckle it through our temptations. That we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, slap ourselves around and says, I can do this. But what often happens with the white knuckling is you go and you're doing really well, and then Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. Maybe you get through pretty well. As opposed to this recognition of who I am and who God is to me. And this is the great grace. I put part of this in my bulletin article, but it's from a homily for a penance service in Lent that I read about years ago, and I use whenever we have the penance service here in Lent. And it's saying, a child that is lost in a toy store no longer has any desire for any of those toys. Those toys hold no draw on him. What he wants in that moment is his mommy. Right? And so Jesus didn't overcome his temptations by being some sort of moral giant where he was able to go and say, "See, I am greater than all of this. None of this has any draw on me." But rather, he knew that his Father's love was greater than the draw of any of those things, that bread that he would turn from stones, or the power and the glory in all the nations of the world, or the glory that he would get from throwing himself from the temple. That he knew his Father's love was far more important, far greater. Because he knew who he was. If you are the Son of God. And Jesus says this to us today. You are God's son. You are God's daughter. These words spoken to Jesus at the baptism is then spoken to each of us in our baptisms. You are God's beloved daughter, God's beloved son. He's pleased with us. And C.S. Lewis, a great Christian writer of the last century, said it wasn't that Satan so much puts stuff into our minds as he makes us forget. He makes us forget who we are. He makes us doubt. We think about it. That very first temptation, when he is tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden, there he comes in and he says, "Did God really say that you couldn't eat of any of the fruits of the tree in the garden?" He's putting a doubt into God's goodness and God's love into her mind. She says, "Oh, no, we can eat of all these things," but you must be wondering what's going on in her mind. She must be saying, "But what if he did say we couldn't eat of these things? That would be bad. That'd be horrible. No, God said we couldn't eat of only that tree. We couldn't touch it lest we die." Now, God never said we couldn't touch the tree. God said just don't eat of it. Already you can see now there's this distance between God and the truth of his commandment. She says, "If we eat of this or touch it, we will die." And the serpent says, "Oh, you won't die. God is keeping something from you. If you eat of that tree, you'll be like God. And he doesn't want that. He wants to keep something from you." And Eve starts to believe that. Because she's forgotten who she is and God's love for her. And this is the story of our lives. In those moments when we remember God's incredible, tender, loving mercy for you and for me, we can overcome those sins. We can overcome those temptations. But it's so often that we forget. And we try to fill our emptiness grasping at the things of the world. But I don't know if you know this. I've said it too many times in the past. Probably because I need to learn it myself. But the more we grasp, the more we cling, the more we try to fill ourselves with the things of the world, the emptier we become. It doesn't fill us. Again, why we do this fasting and Lent is an opportunity for us to feel that emptiness instead of trying to fill it immediately with the things of this world. You know, I've shared this quote before, but basically, this is from Christopher West, a Catholic speaker. He says, "We worship that which we think will satisfy our deepest hunger." We worship that which we think will satisfy our deepest hunger. God, therefore, in his first commandment, saying, "You shall love the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods beside him," says, when he says that we are to worship him alone, he's saying, "I am the one who will satisfy your deepest hunger. your deepest longing. But will we allow ourselves to sit with that longing, that emptiness, that hunger long enough to let Him come and fill us? Or will we just grasp at, pleasure and longing to possess and pride? May we this day reroot ourselves in the truth of who we are, God's beloved daughters and sons, so that in that knowledge of God's love for us, we may overcome every temptation.